Hi, and welcome to the Indeed podcast. I'm your host, Kai Brand Jacobson. Today's episode is an interview I was particularly excited about, and which I hope you will enjoy as much as I did. In this Indeed Knowledge Series podcast, I speak with Peter Muyshondt, Chief of Police in Rupel, Belgium. The Rupel Police have been partners in the Indeed project, helping to bring the deep expertise of practitioners in the field. In our conversation together, Peter sheds light on the evaluation needs within the Belgian police force, particularly regarding their approach to radicalization prevention and intervention. Belgium's police system operates at both local and federal levels, with local police focusing on prevention and federal counterparts on repressive measures, all under a coordinated mechanism chaired by local mayors. Despite this structure, a critical challenge identified is the lack of comprehensive evaluation practices to assess the effectiveness of their strategies, to provide actual evidence of what works, what doesn't, and why, to help inform policies and practice. In our interview, we focus on the perspective of practitioners and what police agencies in the field need from evaluation to make it hands-on and relevant for their work, as well as some of the challenges of current approaches to evaluation and innovations which may be needed in the field to make evaluation more relevant to practice. Here is the insight of a leading expert practitioner with decades of experience. Welcome to What Practitioners Need from Evaluation, a view from the Belgian police, an interview with Peter Muyshondt, Chief of Rupel Police. Welcome to the Indeed Knowledge Series, where we dive into exploring evaluation and learning in the field of preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization. I'm very glad to be joined today by Peter Muyshondt. Peter is the Chief of Police in Rupel. Peter, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, Peter, before we dive in, I'd like to ask you to share with us a bit of background about the work that you do in your role and how you are engaging with addressing violent extremism and radicalization in the Belgian context.
Well, before I start talking about myself and my own situation, I have to refer to the organization of the Belgian Police Services Organization. We are one police service organized on two levels, and that may sound a bit atypical, but you have to take into account the rather complex organization of the Belgian state. Belgium is divided in local police areas where there's a chief of police in charge of a local police organization, and those people have to take care of all first-line police efforts, duties, whatsoever. But there's also a part of extremism and radicalization. When we are confronted with people in the process of radicalization, then we go into a kind of processes where also federal police agencies are involved, where the coordination unit for the threat analysis on the federal level is involved, where intelligence services are involved. So we have a multidisciplinary network approach in dealing with the process of radicalization on the local level, where it's more or less focused on prevention, and the federal level, where it is more focused on repression and how to tackle potential actors who are really going to commit violence or want to commit an attack or something like that. Then we have the repression part. And there is a pretty good collaboration system between the two of us, and it's all been elaborated after the attacks of 2016 in the national airport and the metro stations in Brussels. And then I'm thinking of what this Indeed project is aiming is, I think we are lacking a bit of evaluation of the things we are doing on the strategic level, but also on the local level and the levels in between. That's more or less what we do.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to dive into that aspect of looking at within your work, what are your actual needs as first-line practitioners when it comes to evaluation and how that could be useful. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you to help us to understand a little bit more. What is the context that you're dealing with as police, as first-line practitioners in Belgium? What are the types of radicalization or violent extremism that are on your horizon? What are the types of situations that you, as local police in Belgium, are engaging with in this field?
All kinds of extremism, but mainly left-wing and right-wing extremism, executed offline and online. Also environmental extremism, and then, of course, the jihadi extremism. I think those are the main four fields where we are active in. We are a small country located in the center of Europe, but we have a lot of international institutions which are very interesting for targeting. We had our attacks. We are neighboring France, who had also a history of quite some attacks. There are some short links between Brussels and France. We saw it in other cases. So that makes us pretty much, we are pretty vigilant of terrorism and violent extremism. Yes.
And in terms of your operations and how you engage with that at a local level, what is some of the breadth of the work that the Rupel police are involved in?
Well, we get a lot of information of people in the process of radicalization. Sometimes it is interesting of diving deeper into that. Sometimes it's just neighboring who want to put people, neighbors in discredit or jeopardizing situations. So we are in an environment where we are in a somehow elevated level of threat on a national level. So we are vigilant also what is happening in the broader European context. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. Look at what's happening in Gaza. We have a very visible Jewish community, for instance, living in this area. Also in Brussels and Antwerp. We are on a higher level of alert. That means that every information that reaches us has quite of an importance, and we will go into that immediately because we do absolutely want to avoid another attack or something that is on the verge of happening. And we have been able to prevent some attacks as well. So it is something that is always right under the surface. And all our first-line police officers are also vigilant. And then when we get information, intelligence, we put it in the system. So the system is not just a computer or something. It's a system. I mean, we put it on the agenda of the local integrated security cell, where the mayor is the president. Mainly, the information comes from police, which is normal. But he can invite all other services that are really who could have an influence on the person that might be in the process of radicalization. And then we have the intermediate level where all police forces, federal, local, and intelligence services come together. Also, the QTA will be there. And then you have the national level where it's more or less on the planning, the strategic planning, and how we should deal with the international threats and movements going on in society. So we have a system organized on 2 or 3 levels, where local and federal services are collaborating, and where the local police is the key. We bridge between the preventive level, the local integrated security cells, and the local task forces, which is where the intelligence services are also present. It's the local police. We have this role of information officer, we call it. It is the local police who's bridging the gap between the preventive meeting and the repressive meeting. In the repressive meeting, the local mayor is no longer part of the team. Then when it comes to the district attorney, who will be there, the QTA, the coordination unit. But it is the local police who is really bridging the two. We are part of the two meetings.
In Belgium, the architecture for coordination between these different levels and sectors is quite well developed, as you've just described. I'd like to ask you at the local level, where you said that you're also orienting more towards preventive approaches. To what extent do these cooperation or coordination mechanisms also include actors from social services, education, community-based organizations, and other actors?
We can involve every actor possible, and it is the mayor who can decide who to invite around the table. So it's really a multidisciplinary case study. There are many cases, but we put cases on the table, and it's the mayor, informed by mainly police, to invite every actor, service, person whatsoever who can have some influence on the person. So it is no longer about who is who. It is about how can we effectively influence the process that is going on or that we think is going on, because it's also, there's a nuance. So not everybody is in the process of radicalization. It's not just because you express yourself or you start citing a verse from the Quran that you're in the so that's a very difficult exercise or decision to make. Are we going to invest on this case, or is it just some juvenile man, woman, whatever, who is looking for some identity or so? So that's a very difficult exercise, and in order to make that properly, we invite everybody who can contribute to this case, because police, we think like this, a mayor has other interests, social work thinks differently. So we have to gather all those partners, make an assessment, and then say, okay, this is interesting enough. There is quite some information that this is not going the right direction, and then we make a plan of action on the local level. Who is going to do what? And the mayor will invite everybody back after a week, 2 weeks, a month, depending on the situation, and we come back with what have you done, what we agreed upon on the first meeting. If this is not sufficient, and this is our role as local police, we make a report of every case that we have been discussing on this table, and this report is something that is also legally embedded in our law, goes to the local task force. The local task force has access to the cases we discussed on the first table, and they can also make an assessment because they have other information, which is not really that we can share on the table with the mayor and all services. There is classified information because I can be part of that local task force only if I have a specific security clearance. That's one of the premises before you can enter this meeting. So I have this clearance, and some of my people have this clearance. Those information officers have this clearance. They need to have it, and they can join the table where intelligence services and federal police investigation units and so forth, we can share more information. The district attorney is also there, and then we start really working around the judicial parts. Is there any decision that has to be made? Do we have to arrest the person? Do we have to start a judicial investigation? Do we should start put a special team responsible for observation? Should we have a telephone tap and so forth? That's that table. The prevention table with the mayor is how can we prevent the process of developing more and more and more. That's how we work. Is this very performant, effective? I have no idea. I think when we have people names on the table, then I think this system is effective. But I think we only know 2 or 3% of what is happening in real life. In real life, online, offline, we don't know what is going on there. We have indication, we think we have information, and we start to create a complete image of what is going on. We increase our vigilance, but there is so much going on that we don't know yet. And that is what is also a bit stressful, because we don't know. We think, and once we know, I think our system is, looking at our history, is quite developed, is quite evolved. It can also be improved, but it is quite developed, elaborated for now. But we don't know so much, and that is, I think that is one of the key issues we always have to take into account. We think we're good, but we don't know much. I think we have to be very much aware of the limitations of our system right now.
I really appreciate your frankness and how explicit you've been in naming it. You spoke to the fact of how difficult the issues are, and you've developed an elaborate response system and architecture in Belgium and coordination between these levels. And you spoke about a breadth of both repressive and preventative measures, but then bringing it to, is it all working? To what extent is it really working? We don't know. And I'd like to ask you, as someone who's on the ground, right at the front of field in addressing these issues, how do you, as a local police service, how do you, within this architecture at the local and national level, how do you engage with trying to answer that question and trying to understand if what you are doing is it working? How is it working? To what extent should we be doing other things? Are we doing the right things? How do you approach engaging with those issues practically?
I think we are evaluating what we do, but it is not evidence based, or maybe it is evidence based, but we don't try to use all those. We just do it, and that sounds a bit naive, or how do you say it? Not really developed. But first of all, there are also follow up meetings. If you have this first meeting on the local integrated security cell, there is, for instance, a role for the neighborhood police officer, one of my people, to follow up, to reach out to the person. We call it, I don't know the word in English, but it is like we really are going to be very closely to this person. We are going to make phone calls. We are going to visit him at home, talk to his neighborhood. How is he doing? Make contact, and make sure that the person knows that he's being followed up, but on a constructive way, not really like I'm afraid of. No, we try to follow up. And it's not only police, it can also be social work. So we're going to try to follow up. If this person is available already or capable or doing some kind of interaction with us, that's also something that will make us more comfortable. There is interaction, that's also kind of evaluation. Do we have contact? If the person is not willing to talk to us and is really closing everything, so we at that time we don't have any power to intrude his personal life. That's the other local task force can, but we at that stage not. That's an indication to see, okay, what we are trying to do is not working.
Mm-hmm.
So that is evaluation on a very simple police officer's basis. So it is not evidence-based. However, we see that what we try to do does not reach the targeted outcome. So I think that's kind of an evaluation. Is that the good evaluation? I'm not sure. On the other table, the local task force, then there will be some measures that might be implemented, and if we can really avoid an attack, then we can say we did a good job. But did we really change people's way of thinking? I'm not sure. There are some other programs developed in prison. There's also activity in prison in order to, once we have arrested somebody, we have prevented an attack, that in prison there are some professionals who are trying to work with those people in order to get them to de-radicalize, because one way or one day they will definitely be liberated, get back in society. So there's also programs in prison system. What I think, because I cannot speak for every chief of police in Belgium, but what I think is lacking is that what we should have is somebody, an external person who is trained in evaluation, who will be assisting us in our work, what we are doing, and using the proper indicators, inform us, look, if you have contact with this person, try to figure out that, and that, and that, so that I can make a proper evaluation of what you want to do. We cannot do that. I think we have to be honest, as we have so much things to do, so much things to take care of. This evaluation part is missing. We don't have, when I was talking about evaluation, it's like, do we have contact or not? On that level, we can do. But when it comes to a program, does working together with schools has any effect on the radicalization project of young people? No, we as law enforcement, we are not able to do that kind of evaluation. Does on the individual level, do we reach what we would like to reach? For instance, this person is thinking differently. We don't have the tools, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the time. So if there would be somebody assisting us from a university, from an academic environment, from a private environment, schooled in evaluation, I think that might be very useful, because we are now investing quite some time in things that we think are working, but I'm not sure that they are really working. We are mainly referring to what we have been doing for years, so it will be good, but I think we need sometimes some critical views on what we are doing. And I think our system, the structure is okay, but the outcomes, the outputs, I think there should be some evaluation implemented as well. And we don't have it. We have academics and so that are evaluating the Plan Air, for instance, on the national level. And I think they're also professionals. They will make good evaluation on what we are doing. We are adapting the strategy constantly. But on the local level, what we are doing in the first line, I don't think we have enough evaluation of what we are doing.
I'd like to take our conversation there together to look at what it is that you've described as your current situation and the needs, and to try and think through together what would be actual models or approaches that could fit for the needs and the realities of police in your operations on the ground. Because you spoke to the fact that on the one hand, it's not happening, but also that you're not able to do it. And maybe it shouldn't be, maybe it can't be the role of police to be doing that themselves, because that would prevent you from carrying out your operations and the work that you need to do. But there needs to be a capacity to address this need in some way, this ability to really go deeper. What you were describing before is basically what we would call monitoring. It's monitoring. Is the relationship there? Are the contexts there? Are the incidents? But the evaluation is the deeper question of really seeing what actual impact is it having, and is it working, and are we achieving the objectives? Now, do you think that would work best? A lot of what we've seen in recent years is bringing in external academics and external evaluators who come in and are there for a short term, carry out an evaluation, and then often it's published as a report, may go as an academic journal, may go as a report to police or to others. Is a system like that something that would be sufficient to what you need? Because what I heard you describing is the need to have almost a capacity that would be built in, that you would have, like many institutions and agencies do, a monitoring and evaluation officer or unit who's able to engage in this deeper work. But also you were saying that you would need someone who can coach or can guide your officers to say, these are the things I need you to be, asking about or looking about to see if we're really achieving change. Do you think it's sufficient to have what has been part of the practice in Europe over the last decades, a model where we would recruit, bring in external consultants, academics, sometimes from universities, to do short-term evaluation? Or do you have a more permanent or constant need to really be able to test and evaluate and to see what's working? Is it going in the right directions? Where something like building in units or capabilities that also understand your operational context, understand your needs, might actually fit better?
I think the second option. I think those let's say consultants come in, make an assessment, evaluation of what we were doing there, doing some interview surveys. They are participating in some meetings, and then after a few months, they make a report and say this and this is good, and this should be better because that's good. But I think there's so much things to read, and not only in the field of extremism, radicalization, because there's a minor aspect of our work. We have so much other things to do from this local point of view. So this is just something that comes on top of all the tasks that we have to do. So we will not read it. I think, let's be honest, we will not read it. What we do now, but it's also applicable for all the other fields we are responsible for. We have action plans, for instance, how we're going to tackle property theft, how we're going to deal with drugs, how we're going to try to decrease the number of traffic accidents. We have about 500 events going on every year. How can we reduce personnel capacity? How can we influence organizers for events to invest in private security and so forth? That's what we do. What we need is, and we have that already a bit, but we are not really trained to it, is like I have an accountability towards my mayors. I do it every month. I have this monthly report with all facts and figures, and then we are seeing 10 trends, like the number of traffic accidents in that municipality is increasing. Why is that? And then how can we, as local police, because we're not the only actor, how can we influence the number of traffic accidents by developing those and those and those actions. And then we should see after a year or 2 years, does these actions have any effect on the number of traffic accidents? And is there a correlation between these actions? Because it might be that there is a decrease, but there's another factor. So that knowledge, that is something we should have more in-house, but it all comes back to financing, because I need more patrol officers to go outside in their police cars. If I'm trying to convince my authorities I need budget to have somebody who is really trained in evaluation in order to evaluate all the project, the processes, regular work, and so forth, they will say, okay, you get the budget, but let's invest into patrol officers instead of somebody. That's also the reality. We have budgetary limitations, and then you have to focus on the right profiles. What you really need? People, community members, they think we should see police more often. Okay, that means you have needs of more neighborhood police officers, beat officers, more patrol cars on the streets. That's what people are. That's local police. Those mayors are elected by those communities. Mm-hmm. They listen to the needs of the community. People living here don't give, excuse my words, about extremism that is occurring in the heads of some people. They don't care. They need more visible police. They need access to police officers when they have something to complain about. So that is also the field of tensions that we are working in. But people skilled in evaluation can be useful for all the police work, not only radicalization. I think they need to be skilled in evaluating processes and projects. I like to work in projects and processes. Those things is some.
And it can be relevant for across the breadth of the work that you're doing as a local police service. And that's one of the challenges we have, helping to bring forward this understanding when you have a limited amount of resources, to recognize the importance of actually building and embedding an evaluation and learning capability into our services. But at the end of the day, what we've seen where it has been done is that it is actually cost effective and effectively it pays for itself, because it helps us to see which of our initiatives are more effective and which are not. What can we do that can achieve better results and what can't? In the absence of paying for it, we can have programs, initiatives, and processes which can go on for years and can also be expensive themselves, but may not bring us to the goal that we want. When you can build in the capability for evaluative practice in an agency and enable that reflective learning with the first line practitioners, with the different actors involved, then you can support that ability to understand effectively together, where should we be investing our resources? What processes can help us best achieve those results? And at the end of the day, it becomes also cheaper and faster, because we're using our resources more effectively and we're better able to achieve. But bringing about that argument at the policy level is one of the areas that needs engagement today in Europe as well.
Mm-hmm. But it's a Belgian context. We, from a very rational, logical point of view, that completely makes sense. When it comes to a political point of view, because all my mayors are very smart people. When I'm talking to them one-on-one, they completely comply, they completely understand, but as a politician, they think differently. And that's the difficulty sometimes when it comes to budgetary discussions. We have that every year, and I'm very pleased to have mayors because if I have a good argumentation, they follow. If I don't have a good argumentation, they say no, we don't buy it. But I like this kind of work. But you have to bring some good arguments in order to. If I'm lacking officers on the streets, asking for evaluation capacity in the forms of person or in the forms of training or whatever, they think, okay, let's focus on this one, and then it's the politician talking. Rationally, I have one of my mayors is also a civil engineer in one of the chemical plants here. He's he's a very smart guy. But then the politician speaking. So that is also that's work in progress. And
And I
then
think the key then is for us to know what, as a politician, what are the arguments that need to be made for them also to hear that, because it's not only about it making sense, agreeing with it on a logical level, but we have to look at what is their reality and what they need as politicians. There's a field that has developed over the last decades on the science of violence prevention. And you've actually had building the evidence base of the effectiveness of these processes and interventions. In some contexts where they've been introduced by cities, you've had 50% reductions, 30%, 50% reductions in violent incidents. And that's quite significant. And this is programming that has also been done across a breadth of cities, from small to large. And I think with politicians, you're saying that for or for their constituents, for people in the community, it's important for them to see police, to feel that presence. Also, we know as a reality that it's important for people to see results and to see reductions in violent incidents, reductions in the issues that concern them. And that's where, as we build the evidence base on the approaches that work, we can actually point out to policymakers and to politicians that these instruments can help us achieve these results, which are what they want as politicians as well. I'd like to double back to one of the things that you mentioned earlier, which is also a key challenge that we face in the practice of evaluation today. We bring in consultants. Very often in the European context, these are either consultants from think tanks and institutes or academics from universities, sometimes who have background in the PCVE de-radicalization field, not always, usually without background in evaluation. So the very ones we're calling in to be experts, we bring them in as experts simply because we assume that as academics, they might be experts, but very often they have absolutely no training, background, expertise, or experience in actually doing rigorous evaluation. It wasn't part of their training for it. And then what is done at the end of that is producing a report. And the reports are often quite weighty, quite long, framed in certain ways and languaging. Sometimes they don't even go back to those who were involved in the process. So they may interview and engage with police officers or officers at different levels. But then the report just goes to senior leadership or goes to a government unit. So the people who've invested their time don't even necessarily see what comes out of the entire process. And that's led in many contexts across Europe to a justified degree of skepticism about the value of even doing this in the first place. People have very limited time, they give that effort, and they don't see anything from it. But then when the end result comes out just as a publication, a report that sometimes might help an academic career because they can bring it out in a journal. But as you said, a practitioner on the ground and a policymaker, the people that are actually at the front of the field engaging with these issues, will very often not have the opportunity or the luxury to simply sit through. What I would like to ask is, how do we need to be formulating the learning when we do evaluation, when we understand and identify this works or this doesn't, or how should we approach engaging with a community stakeholder, someone who's in the process of being radicalized? What are the ways that we could be bringing out that learning to the field to make it useful for the police officer in their situation?
That's a good question. I think we should start thinking about using their language. You were talking about stakeholder. My people are not talking about stakeholders. I think it's that level we should. What is? This is a very difficult question. I'm not sure that I can actually respond with, but there is something as police culture as well. You have structure, we have meetings, we have positions, we have rules of conduct, and that's structure. But the culture is something completely different. And as a chief of police, you don't always influence the culture of, even we think we can influence culture. No, that's not. I think we should stop thinking that. There is something that is going on in those patrol cars. That's the street level police, and then you have the management level police. So there is a difference. If you really want to get them on board and start thinking in effects and results, they should be engaged in the project that you're developing, not from some consultant who is writing a report, because that's then I can guarantee you that nobody will read it, and even if they read it, they will start arguing against the content of the report. So in the process, you should really engage them and make sure that what they do is reflected in the report, or that they're really their opinion is, and then you get I think what you want. But like I said, in the field of radicalization, this is just a minor topic of what we do. And the evaluation methodology, the way of thinking about what I'm doing, is this really leading to something better? Is this cost effective or whatsoever? That should be something that is going through all.
So that's relevant across all areas of operations and practice.
Yes. But then this police culture comes back, because old police officers will say, hey, we do this for decades. We are not going to change that. This works. They don't start thinking about evaluation. Young people with some background, they come, why are we doing this? But it takes a week, 2 weeks, and they are influenced by the police culture. That's something that you should also take into consideration once you want to make some adjustment or changements in the work of the first line police officers. It also goes up for us, for instance. We also are working in a specific police culture. We also reluctant when somebody externally comes, you should be in my uniform before you can express things like. So we're all in this situation.
And I think that's common across almost all fields and all sectors. We have our own cultures, our own systems. And if someone comes in from the outside who hasn't lived it, who doesn't engage with it day to day, and then if we come forward with recommendations and proposals that are just even written or spoken in a language which doesn't at all connect with what we use in our field, and with proposals where that may seem nice or sound nice on paper, or maybe it doesn't even, but we don't always see, okay, how do you practically make that relevant to the day-to-day work? It's interesting that there has been a lot of evolution in some small parts of the evaluation field globally, where they've shifted away from this idea that you need to have a huge evaluation process and then the end result of it is bringing out a report or a publication at the end. And instead, they look at more the evaluative processes where you can engage, for example, police officers or the other actors that you're working with in a situation to enable them in real time to be reflecting upon critical challenges or reviewing together how they deal with different incidences and what works, what doesn't work, and or even getting feedback from the people they're doing it with, which can help with those just instant recognitions or realizations or ways that help us to see things in our own practice, sometimes that are working or that aren't working, that we can change. So shifting from an orientation to looking at evaluation as a huge weighty process that leads to a big publication at the end, to looking at embedding evaluation practices and moments that can support people in the immediacy and the real time of their work. Some of the other things we're seeing is really looking at how do you enable evaluation processes where you then harvest insights and learnings from the practitioners, from the people engaged in the situation themselves, and then bring that forward in training or looking at case situation learning. So you take a specific case and you create the tools to help all the actors involved to see what worked, what didn't work, what can we improve in our practices next time, but in a real moment situation so that you're able to harvest that in almost real time for those in the field. Do any of these seem like things that would connect more or could possibly fit with the context that you face as police?
Well, what you've been mentioning is what we do already. For instance, we had a shooting incident a few weeks ago. The day after, we gathered every actor involved and for debriefing, also for emotional purposes, but also for what did we do wrong, what could be better. And it is interaction between all those people, first line, who are really involved. If we have these local integrated security cells, we take the beat officer, the neighborhood police officer is going to sit on the table. It's not me who's going to talk to the mayor about the situation. We bring him or her on the table because they leave from the table to this specific address and they know what has been discussed. And we also make sure that once this person comes to the table and says, I have observed this and this and this, we take it seriously. It's his case. We try to implement the circumstances that we can do this. But when I'm looking at the outcomes of Indeed, the evaluation, the description of the evaluation is too high a level for those first-line police officers. We try to implement a culture where every intervention, and we have 50, 60 interventions a day, that everybody has the feeling that I'm not feeling pretty well with how you reacted into this specific situation. They should be able to debrief and give feedback without being offended, without being threatened by sanctions and so forth. That's what we try to implement. I think this is the kind of evaluation of what we do. And it's also an evaluation of the process, evaluation of the way we have been working, evaluation of the instructions that we have been issuing. But it can also be an evaluation of we have been doing this and this and this, but actually the person got more aggressive. So this is also an evaluation on the outcome. But this is not so fancy. This is not so sexy like what we are trying to produce and that's not criticalizing towards Indeed. That's also for our internal. Sometimes we try to make working groups and we produce something. But I think that is a challenge to make sure that for those people who it is really purposed, that they get, and that we try to speak the language of the people in the first line and create an environment where people can be critical too, and then you are implementing the evaluation process in their first line work. If not, they just start working mechanically. They try to avoid sanctions. They want to avoid disciplinary measures whatsoever. They just do what has been written in the papers. That's also important, but we also have to create an environment where we can just, even on the level of two beat officers, did we act properly? Did we reach did we really de-escalate the situation or did we not? And what is the reason why it didn't work this time? I think that's also evaluation, but that is something that we should have more on the first line. And there is a gap between projects that are on the higher level and the group where it is, in all honesty, targeted for. That doesn't mean that you can have high-level procedures, projects, and so forth, because they can also target, for instance, the strategic level. But if you want to develop a tool that is really for the first-line police officers, you have to take that into account.
What you're speaking to is what many of us who work in evaluation would say is the absolute first need for an evaluator to understand. What are the realities, the context, the conditions which the ones you're working with are engaging in? What are their procedures? What is their language? What is their culture as an organization? What is it that they experience day to day? And to map out when you said that's part of what we all already do, that's where it really clicked for me, because that's what we need to look at. It's not about bringing in a system or an architecture that's completely new or bringing in something that's totally foreign or from the outside. It's about looking within your practices and systems and how you're working now, and to see where are the spaces where that can be supported. And then what are other components that might add on to address missing links or gaps, like embedding M&E capability that understands the culture and the context of the work of the police, so that you have that as part of your organizational structure. I think one of the strengths that I would see in part of the work, which Indeed has brought forward, is simply at the level of understanding the need to bring evaluation practice forward from looking at it as something which is just done by external experts or looks only at the research and the academic side. And in the model which Stefan Kloos, one of the colleagues in the project, inspired from medicine, has brought, it's looking at what is the best knowledge we have within our institutions and externally. And that is one of the areas we need to engage with. But the other is then looking at the exact context, the communities that we're working with, and the culture, the values, the experiences, the perceptions from the communities. And the third is the need to engage with practitioners' expertise and professional judgment and the on-the-ground experience and knowledge of those that are actually doing the work, be they from police or local authorities, psychologists, social workers, engaging with it from different aspects. And up until now, within the evaluation field, within PCV in Europe, there certainly has been really that focus on knowledge is what academics and experts have, and coming in and using that to assess what's working and then produce a report. And this model where, at least just in the way of thinking about it, it's saying you need to fundamentally understand context and engage with the communities and what's happening there. And if you want to have really evidence-based evaluation, it needs to engage with practitioners and professionals' judgment and expertise and the realities they face. What needs to be done further, what is a critical next step for the field, whether it's in Belgium or elsewhere in Europe, if we want to get better at this, is to look at how do we build evaluation processes and tools that actually fit into the working needs and realities of agencies on the ground.
Yes.
Peter, really, it's I so appreciate having the chance to speak with you today, and you're sharing with us the model and the approach that you have in Belgium, some of the situations that you're facing and working to address radicalization and violent extremism, but really getting your firsthand view as a practitioner of extensive experience in the field of what do you need from evaluation tools for it to actually work for your reality and your situation as first-line police directly engaging with these issues in your context?
We need simple things, very simple things that can work. We like to work in instructions, in checklists, and that's our work. What could be useful is to have something that is really, and I'm not sure it is feasible, but like a thinking process that we can go through with some evaluation questions, but keep it simple. Simple. And I know, as partner of Indeed, you're focusing on evaluation, not only on the very operational level, you're also focusing on evaluation on strategic levels, on policy making levels, and so forth. So this is not a critics towards the outcomes of Indeed, because I know the scope is much broader than what I'm speaking as chief of a local police force here. And then we need some things that are really very useful, very easily to implement, and not before you come to the key you have to read 12 pages, because we have so much input from the judicial authorities, from the ministers of interiors, from justice, things that are changing. We have to read so much, and we have to implement that in our daily processes. If you want to go to a kind of a culture where evaluation is part of the process, keep it as simple as you can. And I know there's so much knowledge around in the world about evaluation, but just try to, and I think that's also a sign of intelligence. Are you able, or are you capable of translating something that is how do you say it? When there is some basic structure, references whatsoever, we write something that is really academically supported, sustained. I think the real strength of such project is how can you translate that towards something that is useful in the first line. For instance, one A4 page where you can check for the neighborhood policing, addressing a family where there is radicalization going on, checks and balance, check. And at the end of the page, that's very stupid what I'm saying, but that can be useful, that shall be used. If you start disseminating a whole of libraries with some, nobody will read it. I'm speaking for the first line police officers. I'm not speaking for academics. I'm not speaking for policymakers who have some cabinets and advisors around them. That's something different. But I'm sitting near my uniform. I'm speaking for those people, my investigators, my beat officers, my patrol officers. What shall be used is something that is really easy to to take on the field. And they are not going to read all documents and books about what works in medical fields and so forth. They are not going to read it. If you are capable of translating the output from Indeed towards something that is really useful on the street, they can even put it in their pack. And how do you say it? The what you have in your trousers,
your pocket. Put it in the pocket.
You put it in your pocket. Then, and that is, I'm just using this very literally, but I think that is a challenge.
It is a challenge. And one of the reasons that I so wanted to have this conversation with you is to be able to name that challenge explicitly. And exactly as you've said, we're in a moment where we need work at different levels. We need things to help academics understand. We need things to bring it forward with policymakers. But at the end of the day, and I think you've really brought this forward very clearly and very well. If you want to have something that works with first-line practitioners, it has to be simple. It has to make sense. It has to be something we can fit in our pocket. It has to use the language that we use and understand the culture and the context we're working in. And it has to be able to be something that we can build into our day-to-day work. And talking about evaluation and evidence-based evaluation relevant not only when looking at PCVE or de-radicalization, but to the breadth of the work that you're doing as police on the ground. Thank you so much for taking us through this and sharing with us. One of the aims of this knowledge series is to do exactly this. It's to hear from those that are on the front lines doing this work as practitioners, as police, as evaluators. What are we facing and what do we need to be able to do it better? Peter, thank you so much for everything you've shared with us today.
You're welcome.